Today we're going over Nguyen's early game bug duel of Beautifly and Dustox. Both are final forms of Wurmple, which would evolve into Silcoon or Cascoon based on its personality value. And both Pokemon were absolutely everywhere in the Generation 3 games. Their competitive value is such that we decided to pair them together for reasons that will soon become obvious, if they weren't already. And so we ask how quote-unquote good were Beautifly and Dustox actually? And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. Shocking as this may seem, Beautifly did not completely dominate its inaugural generation of OU, UU, or even NU. And it had absolutely nothing going for it between its horrible weakness-laden typing and its absolutely pathetic stats, which meant it couldn't extract any use out of its bland move pool. Brutally bereft of benefit, Beautifly was of bottommost viability, born to be brushed aside. Despite Dustox's diverse display of debilitating, disadvantageous dispositions, it wasn't quite as dazzlingly dismal as its fellow plunderer of NU's most despondent depths, because it actually had a useful attacking move in Stab Sludge Bomb, whose excellent 30% poison rate in addition to solid base power meant it could actually potentially do something once it accomplished the dizzyingly difficult endeavor of safely switching in. Still, being better than Beautifly wasn't breathtaking, and Dustox was disregarded all the same, for it was foiled by the same fatal failings. Its move pool could have been put to use on something with better typing or even just better stats, but seeing as it had neither of those two and the poor move pool, even NU and its low power level left it in the dust. Dustox was donezo on day one, pronounced dead on arrival of Ruby and Sapphire. Generation 4 gifted Beautifly and Dustox two great new moves, Instant Recovery in Roost and useful Bug Stab in Bug Buzz. But of course, Generation 4 also brought Stealth Rock, and that was a death knell for several Pokemon that would otherwise be good, let alone Pokemon like Beautifly and Dustox that would be worst of the worst even if Stealth Rock somehow restored their HP. Now there's a concept for you, and it's more interesting than any of Beautifly and Dustox's competitive merits or lack thereof. They were so outclassed. They were outclassed by Pokemon that were already incredibly outclassed themselves, even in NU. The pair couldn't match Mothim, who already was never used because it couldn't hope to match Venomoth. One would get better results with other bad bugs like Wormadam, or with not fully evolved other Pokemon of other types like Shelgon. There is often beauty to be found in dust for sure, but Woman in the Dunes this is not. Beautifly and Dustox remain completely unusable in any capacity whatsoever in Generation 4. Generation 5 gave Beautifly and Dustox one of the best moves in the game, Quiver Dance. But sadly, they were not gifted any of the statistical buffs they also needed in order to be at all usable with Quiver Dance, even all the way down in NU. Once again, they were outclassed by outclassed Pokemon. They couldn't hope to match Masquerain, who we just talked about last week, who could baton pass its Quiver Dance boost, or Butterfree, whose access to Sleep Powder and Tinted Lens made it actually threatening in its own right. And even these Pokemon were gimmicky. To put it in perspective, if a quadruple Stealth Rock weak Pokemon as terrifying as Life Orb Articuno didn't get used because it couldn't hope to match the power of the similarly affected Charizard, nothing else stood a ghastly of a chance. As such, when finally given the opportunity to do so, Beautifly and Dustox plummeted to untiered. It was magnificently brave on Game Freak's end to gift Beautifly and Dustox Mega Evolutions in Generation 6, but they deserved it. Here were two iconic Generation 3 Pokemon that desperately needed a buff, and Oraz provided the perfect opportunity for them to, just kidding. They didn't get squat. Beedrill and not Butterfree got a Mega instead. Even the existence of a new lowest tier in PU wasn't good news for them. Once again, they were completely outclassed by literally everything, including but certainly not limited to other bad bug types and non-fully evolved Pokemon. Dustox at least had an actual set one could use if they were so inclined, and it was fairly unique. It paired Quiver Dance with Iron Defense and Roost to theoretically become unbreakable on both sides of the defensive spectrum, thus allowing it to boost its bug buzzes as high as it needed to sweep the opponent. It was a nice idea on paper, but didn't work out too well in practice thanks to Dustox's dismal defenses exacerbating the effects of its awful typing. As such, Dustox dropped to untiered again, surprising no one. At least it could dignify its existence with an actual set though. That's more than could be said for Beautifly. Unlike Dustox, for some reason it got a stat buff in Generation 6. Its special attack was raised from 90 to 100. However, this wasn't nearly enough for it to find the slightest semblance of a half a niche all the way down in PU. It was so bad that nobody even bothered pretending like it had a real set, and instead just joked about it. Its entire so-called viability was based on the premise that Beautifly was agonizing to look at, potentially lethally so, and thus it dedicated its moves to ensuring it was as visible as possible for its opponent. Consider then this newfound viability of flash as a method for Beautifly's Medusa tactics, in conjunction with bright powder as an item. Beautifly had optimal lighting conditions a professional Instagram shoot would be jealous of, and thus maximizing its odds of terrifying the opponent into defeat or whatever. Flash was complemented by Morning Sun, which cleared any potentially vision obscuring weather conditions. Actually, that's not true at all, but who cares? Not the heroes who came up with this set, that's for sure. As well as Defog, which would remove fog, since competitive Pokemon battles are of course commonly fought on Sinnoh's Route 210. It seems a bit sad that appearance is yet another thing Beautifly is outclassed by Butterfree in, as it borders on cruel that a Pokemon with beautiful in its name has a niche based on its death-inducing ugliness. Those sadistic goofballs at Game Freak have done it again. Generation 7 came around, otherwise known as the 5th generation out of 5, in which to call Beautifly and Dustox 100% unviable was still somehow an understatement. PU had already eluded their reach in the previous generation and had become incredibly power crept in the transition to Sun and Moon, while Beautifly and Dustox had received nothing whatsoever. Well, technically they could make use of Z moves, but so could quite literally everything else, including the Quiver Dancers that outclassed them, namely the excellent Blossom, as well as the other worse options like Masquerain that were still infinitely better choices. As such, once again, Beautifly and Dustox failed to climb out of the untiered crevasse. And that's it. So how bad were Beautifly and Dustox actually? Well, even for bad bug types, they were exceptionally awful. The terrible typing is a given, but when your stats are mighty and a tier pathetic, and your move pool is blandly terrible, well, it's no surprise that neither of the two has ever been even a little bit viable in any tier. Their peak was in Gen 6 PU, when Dustox almost had a terrible gimmick niche, but wound up being too awful even for that. If only Game Freak had given Mega Evolutions to the Pokemon that actually needed them, like these two that had already made reason when Ruby and Sapphire were remade. But they didn't, and Beautifly and Dustox continue to serve as testaments to the idea of not every Pokemon being cut out for competitive. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and in the comments I want to know, what do you think about competitive Beautifly and Dustox? How would you buff it to make them at least not outclassed by the outclassed? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.